relax and start walking. See? Not so hard, is it?
We interrupt this program to bring you...
All right, everybody. My name is Kevin.
And I'm John.
And I'm Adam.
And I'm Julie.
And we are the Real Movie Guys. It's May, so you know what time it is. It's anime. Anime is a special event where we take a look at all your favorite anime movies. This month long, we'll be taking a look at Studio Ghibli films, one of the greatest legendary anime studios to walk the face of the earth. Today, we're taking a look at Howl's Moving Castle. When an unconfident young woman is cursed with an old body by a spiteful witch, her only chance of breaking the spell lies with the self-indulgent yet insecure young wizard and his companions. Okay, guys. Spirited Away is a phenomenal film. That was the last movie we talked about in this series so far of these films from Studio Ghibli. Howl's Moving Castle, I think, is, besides Totoro, the best Studio Ghibli movie that's been made to date. It is my favorite one that I think I've watched the most out of all these movies. I've watched it several times over. I really love this movie, and there's a lot of reasons why, which we'll go into. But before we go into some of the details, I want to get what some of your guys' thoughts are. Adam, what's going on? What do you think of Howl's Moving Castle?
I love this movie. I think this is also my fifth time watching this movie, and I can't deny the fact that it's definitely one of my favorite movies of all time too. It's just so good. It
is, and there's a lot of layers to this movie, and I think it's probably the most tightly knit out of all the, as far as the Miyazaki films, and maybe that having to be an adaptation of a book series that did come out, or one book, and I think there's a couple sequels, but it is an adaptation, a loose adaptation from what I've been told. I've never read the original novel for Howl's Moving Castle, but I think being an adaptation does make this movie a little bit tighter, but yeah, it blows me away every time I watch it. The theming, the characters, the presentation, the music, everything about this movie. I absolutely love it. John, what's going on, man? What'd you think of this one? I'm curious.
This was one of the movie that most seemed like it was most related to like a Disney movie to me.
Okay.
Where the whole kind of like adventure, fantasy-ish kind of vibes that they were throwing down.
Okay.
It seemed most related to a Disney film that I've seen so far.
Right. And what did you think of that? Did that translate very well to you? Did you really have a lot of enjoyment with this one?
I felt like it translated well, but it was also very different too.
Okay. Different how so? Different like bad, different like confusing? Like
no,
what would you say?
Different in like a good way, per se.
Okay.
Like it definitely had very unique characters, I would say.
Yeah, I think the characters are very much of a standout in this movie because all of them are very important and for the most part very well fleshed out. You kind of know everybody's motivations, you know why everybody's there in the scene. They're very important characters to the whole plot. Julie, how about you? What do you think of Howl's Moving Castle?
I love this movie. It has everything. Phenomenal voice acting, wonderful, tightly knit story from beginning to end. Fantastical world. It was amazing.
Yeah.
Top tier.
Yeah, and it's interesting too that this movie, as soon as it starts, I felt like I knew this movie was something special. Like the first shot of this movie is like a bunch of clouds, and slowly you see this giant castle emerge from those clouds, like stomping and walking, and it's this like misshapen, disorganized mess just on four legs, like wandering through this field. It's just a very interesting presentation right off the bat. And it's even more interesting when you realize like things like that are just symbols in this movie. And I think that's like really strong storytelling from beginning to end. This is Miyazaki at his best. Again, this is just my opinion. I think this is his highest level of storytelling he's been able to take it, especially when we talk about things like letting the camera tell your story and not rely on dialogue. The whole beginning of this movie with Sophie just in the town, as you know, before we even meet Howl, he sets up this story where it's just a visual presentation. any kind of dialogue that really happens early on too is background dialogue. Like we hear about these girls gossiping about Howl in the background. It's not actually Sophie engaging with conversation, which, in a typical like Western film, I think they'd be just telling you at the camera, like, hey, did you hear about Howl? He's a magical wizard. You better look out for him. He'll take your heart. It's not really, the story is not told that way, right? It's told from a very background aesthetic by letting the characters speak for themselves while giving you the plot along the way, which again, I think is just very great storytelling on their part. And then we meet the character of Howl. And from the moment you meet that character, Julie's like heart's gushing over there, which I think most fangirls probably are. Maybe fanboys. Hey, no. Yeah, everybody. Howl is this magical character, for sure. And he oozes such a confidence and what you look for in like a fantasy character, right? He's able to like kind of sweep the audience, not just the characters on screen, but the audience off their feet with his character. And he has such an intrigue and a mystery, and it's something that you look for in a movie like this. Adam, what do you think of some of the choices that they made in this movie as far as characters? Did you like all the choices that they made?
They're just so unique, and they all have so much depth to them that it's just like I can't even fathom like where or how anybody would even come up with these characters, because I just love them all. They're all have such a pivotal role to this movie. It's so great. Right,
and I think it's interesting because we talked about Spirited Away prior to this, and in Spirited Away it was very like fly by the seat of your pants storytelling where it was kind of obvious, right? He just made storyboards and he let the story speak for itself. Howl's Moving Castle does not feel like that. It feels a very methodical story told from beginning to end. Again, Julie, do you think that has maybe something to do with this being loosely adapted from source material, that maybe the plot was a little bit stronger for that reason?
Absolutely. I mean, because it's not, where in the past these have all been original stories by Miyazaki.
Kiki's wasn't. I'll preface Kiki's.
Oh, that's right.
Kiki's
okay.
Wasn't, but
right. So when they're his original stories, he has more of that freedom to do his own version of storytelling and storyboarding. But when you have an adaptation, you literally have a blueprint in front of you. And like you said, from what I've heard, it's very loosely connected. But when you have any kind of baseline or outline like that, it's harder to just fly by the seat of your pants.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know we were watching something where he does have a lot of like personal connections to plot points in this movie as well. So I think that really just kind of helps give this movie a sense of direction and clear motivations for every single character. And that really just impacts the movie as a whole in such a great way. Like, it's such a complete movie.
Yeah, I think the symbolism, this is a very personal story, even if it's coated with this fantasy layer of storytelling. This is a very, very, it's kind of a sad story when you really think about how deep this movie actually goes into Miyazaki's life, where Miyazaki is very anti-war. I think we've seen little bits of it kind of in every movie, and even some of the themes where there's like Totoro, for example, in itself is a pseudo an anti-war, anti-history movie. Porco Rosso's kind of like that too. Miyazaki didn't like anybody else, doesn't want these terrible things to have happened in the world. He wants to rewrite history and make these things not happen. Now that we come to Howl's Moving Castle, we see how terrible war really is, and he's not afraid to shy away from it in his own way in this film. As a young boy, he was experienced a lot of the bombings that happened to Japan during the time, and you can see that evidence in this movie when Howl's flying around as the crow monster, flying above the sky. You see the bombs just dropping, raining down on everyone, and everyone panicking and freaking out, and how just horrific and terrifying it is. A lot of people go on to say, and it must be true, Miyazaki didn't come to America when Spirited Away won Best Picture because he didn't want to support a country that was in war with Iraq at the time. That was his stance. He says, I won't go to any country that chooses to participate in war. He even questions his own government, which is very controversial in Japanese culture to do, let alone, another country. But this movie, a lot of people say, is like his answer to what America did. And you could see a lot of parallels between like the bombings that would happen in Iraq during the time, during the power of government, where you have a very like goofy kind of bombastic leader and someone like behind the scenes pulling the strings and letting this war go on. Is it a direct one-for-one comparison? Is it an anti-war? I think it's an anti-war film to some extent. Is it a one-for-one comparison? I think that could be, up to anyone's imagination. What do you think of that, Adam? Do you think that's a really big connection here, or?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that we don't really typically see, especially in an animated movie. I think to this extent, I really, really like all of the themes of this movie, and they hit harder because of I guess how relatable they are,
Right, and how
especially with all the
personal.
characters themselves too, and all of their different personalities, and all of the trials and tribulations that Howl goes through personally too.
Yeah, especially as a character, we see him kind of go through layers of evolving through his character. We see him being at first this big, uh, like peacock-like character, like bright and flamboyant and fantastic. And then as soon as his hair changes color, he's like the end of the world, right? He's like his character completely changes. He's depressed. He's got all these deeper layered issues. And the castle is a beautiful representation of that, this baggage that he constantly carries throughout the movie. The castle is a mishmash of different things and oddities with nuts, bolts, rivets that don't match, and building and brick, and again, all these things that don't make sense, but that's the baggage that he himself, that Hal is carrying. And we find out later on that his heart, technically with Kelsifer, is what's piloting the castle to keep moving. And it's just a very interesting connection. It's not something I think we see typically in Western interpretations of animation. John, how much did that stand out to you? Was that something that you really liked to see in this movie?
Yeah, I think it was enjoyable to see that. It's also always good in a movie where the person doing the storytelling and telling the story is feels very compassionate about what they're doing. I feel like you can see that through his work and how much he really is anti-war and how he really wants to stand up for this. And this is one of his ways of showing it through his great artistic talent and storytelling, especially through this movie. I feel like he shows it very well.
Yeah, and it is a great message overall. And again, I don't know. Again, Western, it seems like something we don't really like to mess too much with our animated films. I don't see us normally getting into those situations. What did you think of that, Julie? Do you have? I think it's incredibly brave. Whatever your stance is on it, I think it's incredibly interesting for them to do.
Absolutely, and to take such a firm stance on it. And we've seen like hints of it definitely throughout some of the other movies. But to flat out say like this is wrong, and like trying to get to that point, like especially how he's such a conflicted character where he has the ability to like go in and fight some of it, but he can't do it on its own. And just the absolute carnage that war, wreaks throughout the entire nation and other nations, and what it does to other people around them. So I think it was very powerful.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And, it's funny. We keep singing the praises of Howl, the character himself. He's not the main character in this movie. Sophie is the main character. Now, John, I'm interested on your take on this. Were you surprised by the old woman take that they went with this movie? And she kind of is the pseudo main. She is the main character throughout the movie. Was that something you expected when you watched this movie?
No, not at all. It was a complete shock.
And what did you think? Because that's, again, very atypical of, like we were talking about earlier about Disney films and the choices they make with these beautiful princesses who, sweep the man off their feet and have the love story. Again, you can kind of argue this movie has a lot of similarities, I think, with like Beauty and the Beast. You can see some of like the similarities there with the storytelling. What do you think of that kind of flop there? I think it's kind of interesting that they went that approach.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an interesting way. It's a unique take of like how they did it too, I feel.
Yeah, because Sophie, it's funny how she's a character from the moment we meet her. She kind of identifies as an old woman almost. She thinks she's ugly, which she's clearly not. She's like this old woman that can't do anything, dresses like an old woman. And even when she's turned into it by the Witch of the Waste, we notice right away she's kind of accepting of it. Like she really wasn't like that messed. Like most people be like, oh no, what have they done to me? Like, yeah, sure, she has like a hot second of feeling that way, but then she's like, all right, well, I guess the persona matches the person, and she just kind of goes along with it, and then she goes to find Howl and to go to be with him and to be his caretaker of his castle and things of that nature. But what I really like in this movie, and I think people could see it two different ways, is they really don't go into much details about like the curse, and slowly throughout the movie we start to see Sophie become young again throughout the movie. And there's times where she'll look very young, and then there'll be times she's like in between, or then she'll be older. But I like how it kind of goes back and forth with her confidence in the movie, her self-confidence, how she feels about herself, and how she shows love towards others. That's how her true character comes back, how her youth comes back, and she begins to become herself again. What did you think of that, Adam? Because I think to a casual viewer, that could seem a little bit confusing at times.
See, I thought that as well. One of my playthroughs, one of my watches.
Hey, well, you gotta do what you gotta do.
One of my watches, I think a few years ago,
Mm-hmm.
I guess I really wasn't focused on the movie at the time.
Okay.
And I had that same thought. But now watching it again,
Okay.
I think this movie does a very good job of conveying it in comparison to, like, I guess other movies that do get a little confusing.
Okay.
But I think this movie does a very good job.
Okay. And what do you think is like the crux of that? What do you think is like the reasoning for that? How this movie does such a good job with it? Like, give it like an example, I guess, would you say?
I think because of all of the other supporting characters,
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody just kind of brings it all together so well, and they just allow it all to just come together,
Right.
I guess, in one nice, complete story.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with the castle itself. If we look at the castle as Howl's heart, right, throughout this entire movie, the castle is
Right.
his heart. Everything inside of the castle is a piece of his heart, essentially. Like Markle, he's like the youth, right? He's the youth and the enjoyment out of Howl's heart. Even Calcifer is kind of like that sarcastic, snide, like kind of another piece of his heart. The Witch of the Waste, when she's in there, she's kind of like maybe like the darker side of his heart, the little like, mischievous side. I think everyone plays a part. And it's interesting that when Sophie goes in there and she starts cleaning up the place, she starts cleaning up his heart and making it whole again, which is essentially the end of the movie. That's crazy foreshadowing, because again, I feel like that has to be planned. I know Miyazaki says he doesn't plan these things, but stuff like that has to be planned, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I love the comment when she first starts doing it, and Hal says something like, "Don't get carried away."
Right.
Like, okay, you can tidy up, but you're not going to get too far into here.
Right. And I think,
and then that when he flies off the handle, when she does go too far and messes with his, potions in the bathroom, and that's his space, kind of like she went too far into who he is as a person, and that now it's actually impacting him.
And I think that's what makes this movie also unique from other Miyazaki tales we had. This is first and foremost a romance film. It is. This truly is like a romance film about these two characters falling in love with each other and learning to exist for one another and be part of each other's hearts. And again, Miyazaki's kind of toyed with the idea of romantic connections in other movies, but I think this was like the biggest one, next to maybe Princess Mononoke, which we didn't really talk about. There's definitely a big, Romeo and Juliet storyline going on there between the two characters. But this movie in particular, I think the romance is done extremely well. What do you think of that, John? Do you think this movie like did a really good job making you feel that these characters are connected to one another?
No, yeah, definitely. I feel like you could almost see it through the writing of how he, in a way, connected these characters, but then also how you could see like him also in a way how he didn't he didn't put it completely together, I would say.
Right. No, I could see that. And I think just Howl as a character is extremely likable, which I think has to do something that I also want to talk about here is now, Adam, have you watched the Japanese version of Howl's Moving Castle at all? Have you seen like for comparison between the English version?
No. I haven't.
All right, I've watched clips just so I could get an idea of the two. Like I haven't watched it fully through, so there's a disclaimer there. I think I really love the dub casting in this movie. I think the dub actually makes this movie significantly better than if I watched it in Japanese, which, sorry, purists, I know that's probably a super controversial and hot take, but Christian Bale really brings, you needed an actor that, is an act. He's an actor, right? He's not typically a voice actor. I really can't think of anything else that Christian Bale really lends his voice to as far as another animated movie, besides Pocahontas. I'll disclaim you there, which even that performance is kind of like, it's fine. It's whatever. It's nothing, anything, whatever. But this movie, you could tell the passion in his voice when he's playing Howl and, guiding us through this adventure. I think if it wasn't for his acting, I don't know how good this movie would have been otherwise. Do you think there's an argument for that, Adam, that the voice cast was that good for this movie?
It's a running theme with the Ghibli movies. I mean, we even had it with Porco Rosso, and
Right.
it's just like it just brings it that much more. I don't know. I feel like it captures the emotions and the personalities that much more.
Right, and then we have like Billy Crystal playing Calcifer, and Calcifer is such a beloved character that even the original author of Howl's Moving Castle, she actually has a fake fireplace in her house that has a Calcifer in her house. That she actually loves this movie so much, even more so than her book to some extent. She actually said she likes the movie better than the own book that she wrote. I think that's pretty telling right there if you really want an example, but these characters are just so iconic. John, what did you think of the character voice acting? Did you think they did a really good job? Part of me likes to think too, and I don't know if you agree with this, that Disney taking over the dubs for these movies was a very good idea. I mean, because at times you can maybe think it's questionable with some of the people, like the Fanning sisters, I think were in like Totoro. They were just kind of popular at the time, but they actually do seem like they do take their time and assign the appropriate voice actors to each role. Wouldn't you agree?
No, yeah, definitely. I feel like that's one of the things too about like how hard voice acting really is for for people to do, but the way that they picked a lot of these voice actors and put them with these characters, I feel like they fit very perfectly. It's almost like in a way these roles were meant for these people and some of the choices that they've made.
Yeah, and I mean, even like a younger Josh Hutcherson, which Julie, I know you're familiar with him from Hunger Games. He was a baby at this point in this movie playing Markle, and he did a really good job. He brings like every character in this movie brings a sense of purity and just like what's the word I'm looking for? Not like innocence, but like just like
I feel like authenticity.
That's it.
Like they
Authenticity,
feel
I
like they're
would say.
characters.
Yeah, I wouldn't question anybody that was really cast in this movie. Even young Sophie, I thought she did a really good job too.
Even Scarecrow, Onion Head, like he didn't even say anything, and he's just like such a good character.
Turnip Head. Oh,
Turnip Head, that's it. Thank you.
Let's talk about Turnip Head for a sec.
Okay.
So, Turnip Head is maybe the one weaker aspect of this movie to some extent, and I think that is maybe one of the parts where it's tough because I gave a little bit of an issue with this when we watched Spirited Away, and I don't know how much of an issue I'm gonna give it here with Spirited Away or with Howl's Moving Castle. There is some randomness almost, but the one thing that this movie does different is that they do foreshadow some things that happened later on in the movie. At the very beginning of the movie, when Sophie's like just talking to people or doing her thing, working about, you hear in the background you hear, "Oh, the prince has been missing. We don't know where he went. I wonder, what happened. We can't find him." Throwaway dialogue, like 10 minutes into the movie, if that. Come to like the last 10 minutes of the movie, suddenly, "Oh, Turnip Head? Oh, you're actually the prince the whole time. The scarecrow that's been following you around." John, what did you think of that reveal? Did it felt super random to you by the end of the movie?
Yeah, it was very random. I was very confused by that. But I get confused easily by these movies. So.
I don't think it's even you. I think there is an argument for it. Hal does make a comment also midway through the movie. I think like at least once or twice he does say like, "Oh, you have an interesting curse. I can't really do anything about it, but just so you know, I know you have a curse." And then when he transports the castle, he makes like another comment like, "Oh, your curse is too strong with you. I can't take you where we're going," or something along those lines. The end of the movie I thought was like kind of ballsy for the prince at the end. I kept joking. I'm like, man, that guy's got some balls here. Sophie's in love with Howl. She's like gushing over Howl, and the prince is like, "Oh, Sophie, you turned me back into a prince because you're my true love." And then I think it was the Witch of the Waste is like, "Oh, well, she kind of only loves Howl. That's who you like." He's like, "Oh, all right. Well, I'm going to go back to my kingdom. I'm going to end this war. But I'm going to come back. Hearts change, just so you know."
Yeah, hearts can change.
I'm like, damn, dude. Cold as ice right there. I give him some credit for that. What'd you think of that, Adam?
I didn't mind
overall? The whole. Go ahead, Julie. Go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mind the whole Turnip Head thing. I think it's actually kind of funny because I guess he was like the catalyst for the war, as they were trying to figure out like where the prince was. I guess.
Right.
Especially with that end dialogue, like, "Oh, go end this war now," and the fact that he was just with them the whole time.
Yeah. He was
I think that's just a little ironic.
Yeah. What do you think of that, Adam? Did you think it was random, or you agree with Julie kind of there?
No, I agree with Julie. I think it was fun. I like that character a lot.
No, I do too. It's just it's funny, but I just love that ice cold though, man. At the end there, just
Yes.
I'll be back. I'm gonna come back.
He doesn't have a chance, poor guy. Not against Howl.
I know. I don't know. Not many men probably can do so well against Howl, but you know that's what's really fun about this movie. Besides like random stuff like that, there is a lot of comedy in this movie compared to other, I think, Miyazaki films, where I actually found myself like out loud laughing with some of the interactions, especially like Sophie when she's bickering with like Calcifer, or even with Howl where she's like, "Oh, you're being so dramatic," because he's like dripping like ooze all over the floor. What did you think of that, John? Was that like really strange, that scene when you started seeing like Howl like turn into like a puddle of goo all over the floor?
Yeah, it's very weird.
But then you see she like takes him to the bath and she gets him all better, and he's like so dramatic. He's like laying like he's dying in bed because he's like, "Oh, my hair's changed color. I'll never be the same man." But it's that kind of comedy that I think this sets this apart from the other Miyazaki projects. Would you think so, John? Would you think that this like that comedy gives this movie a little more identity than some of the others?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like this movie's has a lot more comedy to it than the other ones we've seen so far, which gives it like a nice little change of pace too.
Right. And I think just, again, we talk about it in every movie, but the animation in this movie is so beautiful. And the interesting part that you find out about this film is, yes, the film's all hand-drawn, but on top of that, they had to scan all the hand-drawn files into digital files and then do color correction digitally through this movie as well. That's crazy. You did double work on this movie. Like, you literally made this movie twice. That's insane to me, the level of dedication Miyazaki expects from his people, but it shows off. The colors are absolutely beautiful. This might be the most detailed out of any of the Miyazaki films I think we've seen. One really good example, I think, if you look, is when you see Howl's bedroom and you see all these trinkets lying throughout the room, and at first you're like, oh, that's really overwhelming. But then when you really look at it, it's like, oh my God, this is crazy overwhelming. There's so much hand-drawn detail here. And that's just for a background scene. That has nothing to do with anything that's really going on. That's just a setting. The dedication there is just phenomenal. And I would be remiss, obviously, if I didn't talk just real quick about the score. This is my favorite score in a Miyazaki film. This is one I would actually just sit back, relax, and listen to. Howl's theme, which is the main theme that goes throughout this movie. I absolutely love it. And whenever they introduce a character, you hear like little chimes kind of get intertwined into it. Like when you see Sophie, she gets kind of like her own little version is kind of incorporated. Anytime there's a piece added to the story, another character, we start to see the theme evolve into something even greater and stronger. Again, this movie is just phenomenal. I can't sing its praises enough. And it has one of my favorite conclusions, I think, to a Miyazaki movie, where we have that beautiful scene of it's almost like a time travel where Sophie goes back and she sees the story of Howl, and then she goes like, "Oh, I'll be there for you. I'll be there. I'm the only one who can save you." And again, like I said, if nothing else, this movie really achieves the ending I kind of wish every single Miyazaki film had. This movie is fantastic with that. I can't praise it enough. And I think we're at that point where we're going to give our final scores. I'm going to give Howl's Moving Castle, it should be to no one's surprise, a 10 out of 10.
Don't go out there. It's too dangerous.
Another wave's coming, and Calcifer's too weak to stop the bombs.
Let's run. Don't fight them, Howl.
Sorry, I've had enough of running away, Sophie. And now I've got something I want to protect. It's you.
This movie's the best Miyazaki film to date, in my opinion, and I haven't seen one since then that's lived up to this, or one, maybe, again, Totoro is a 10, I think, for a different level, but as far as Miyazaki reaching perfection, I don't know if a lot of people would agree with this, but I think this is the movie for him. I think this was his magnum opus of everything he's done, everything he's wanted to give us. The characters are all memorable. The setting, the score, the story, the magic. This is the first time we've really gotten major doses of magic in a Miyazaki film, and they leave you wanting more. I want to know more about this world. I would take a sequel in a heartbeat for this just to get some kind of other essence of the story here. Again, it's a masterpiece for many reasons. I think it is Miyazaki's best film. That's where I stand. Adam, how about you? What do you think of this one?
If I could rate it higher, I would, but I'm going to give Howl's Moving Castle a 10 out of 10.
Scorch marks. How? Can you read them?
That is ancient sorcery, and quite powerful too.
It's from the Witch of the Waste?
You who swallowed a falling star, O heartless man, your heart shall soon belong to me. It can't be good for the table.
It's just such a good movie. I will happily rewatch it again right now if I had time. And I would love to have like some sort of a little sequel or something, because I just can't get enough of it. I mean, that's why I keep going back to it.
Yeah, and that's why like I actually picked up the book recently because I kind of want more out of this world. Even if it's not from if it's from the original author and not Hayao Miyazaki himself, I want to see what else is involved in this world because I think there's something incredibly interesting here, and there's themes and stuff that we barely scratched the surface of. There's just so much going on with this movie, and again, it's enjoyable for any level of viewer, whether it's a young child or an adult. It works on every level, which, in my opinion, is the best workings of an animated film in general. When you can work for any level of audience entertainment. John, how about you? What do you think of this one?
I give this movie a solid 8.2.
You turnip head, that's Howl's Castle. That is not what I meant when I asked for a place to stay.
I thought it was a really good movie. Very entertaining. It wasn't the best movie, but I liked it. I enjoyed it. I really did. It's definitely one of the films that we watched so far. One of the films I feel like is better than the rest.
Would you go back and watch this again if you didn't have to for a review?
Maybe. We'll see.
We'll see. Hey, I'll take a we'll see. Hey, that's a small victory if that's what I'm looking for there. Julie, how about you? What do you think on this one?
I'm going to give Howl's Moving Castle a 10 out of 10 as well.
Oh, stupid me. I never should have let her in here.
So what'll it be? That's right. That's a good fire.
Here's another curse. May all your bacon burn.
Really just pure perfection. Christian Bale's performance as Hal, really the entire voice cast is absolutely phenomenal. They really bring their characters to life. This world feels so lived in, so magical, yet with a lot of darkness in it. The most concise story that we've seen so far out of Miyazaki from beginning to end. The music, everything. Perfect. Even as we're talking about it, I'm like, oh, I want to watch it again.
Yeah, it's just, this movie's phenomenal. And one of my favorite lines in this movie is like towards the end where Howl is like, he's laying down on the ground and he just kind of, Kelsifer's been put back into his chest and he's just laying there and he goes like, I feel terrible. Like there's a weight on my chest. And you just see young Sophie just puts like her hand on him and goes, well, a heart's a heavy burden. And it's just, there's so much emotion in this movie. It's like little scenes like that with little pieces of dialogue that Miyazaki really brings to life this incredible story. I think it will be timeless. I'm curious to see, like, within the fan base of Studio Ghibli, if this is one of the most popular films. It's tough because we did talk about Spirited Away prior to this, and a lot of people usually associate that with being their favorite Miyazaki film. But, for me, it really is Howl's Moving Castle. I think it's his magnum opus, but don't let that deter you, ladies and gentlemen. We do have quite a few reviews coming up after this. I promise there's still some good movies among there. Even if they're not the Howl's Moving level, capacity, I think they're really enjoyable and there's something to discuss. So thank you all joining us for this episode of The Real Review. Anime will continue on. My name's Kevin. That's John, Adam, Julie. We are The Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. We'll catch you next time.
If you guys like what you've seen here today, consider giving this video a like and leaving your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay up to date with everything Real Movie Guys related, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget, all you audio listeners at home, we are available on many podcasting platforms. Just search The Real Movie Guys, you should pop right up. Thank you again all so much for joining us on this episode of The Real Review. We are The Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. Catch you next time.